Sometimes after finishing a long project, you're just happy to get the job done, but what happens when you find out there are still a few issues that you need to fix or check on just so that there are no doubts about the quality of the repair? This mower is a great example of that very situation. It starts, runs, and doesn't leak any oil, and it's easy to use, but we need to go just a bit further with the repairs, otherwise there's a good chance that it may never find a good home. In today's video, we're going to be looking at this Troy-Bilt lawnmower, and the problem is that whenever the mower's running, sometimes it makes a terrible chattering sound. Now, I've only ever seen this problem in videos, and I don't recall if any one of them ever fixed it. Well, I guess it's my turn to give it a try. Now, I'm going to try and repair this mower, but yours might be different, so this might not work on yours. So if things are not working out for you, like in this video, please ask about it. I'll be glad to answer your questions. So in the last video on this mower, we had to fix a major oil leak, and even though I did a decent job cleaning the carb, I did eventually have to replace it. However, after all that was done, there was still one annoying problem to fix, along with one maintenance item to take care of. Now, you might be saying to yourself,
"Hey, you can't include a maintenance item as part of a fix."
Unfortunately, that's where you're wrong, and I'm guessing a lot of people have the same mentality. Here's how I see it. You do the maintenance now, or you can fix it later on because you're going to have to do it at some point. Of course, if you hadn't guessed it by now, the maintenance item I'm talking about is checking the valve lash, which is very important when talking about an overhead valve engine. Now, it's not difficult to check it, and it's worth the effort, but if you do forget to check it in time, it can cause some interesting problems. And I almost forgot, I also need to check that the transmission works in all of the gears because in the last video, the lever on the transmission seemed to be a bit sticky. The main problem was that the lever didn't always want to go into 4th gear, so even if there was an issue with it, I would just tell them to leave it in 4th gear. And even though this is its fastest gear, it's not all that fast, and unless you have a problem with your legs, you should be able to keep up with it. So the next step is to start it, test out the gears, and let you hear the sound we need to fix, and just as a warning, you might want to turn down the volume. So as you can see and hear, there's a very annoying sound coming from the recoil that seemed to go away after releasing the rope from the guide on the handlebar. And as you can tell from that test start, what seems to be happening is that the flex from the lower portion of the mower, which happens to be made out of plastic, is allowing the handlebar to move just enough to try to engage the starter pawls with the starter cup. And as you can see, there's several inches of travel on the handlebar where the guide is located at, but look what happens when we move further down the handlebar. If we relocate the guide a few inches down, there's a lot less travel here, which means this might be a good way to keep the recoil from trying to activate the starter pawls. To find out if this is going to work, I'll start the mower up and pretend that the guide is in a lower position. So as you can see, if we move the guide down just a few inches, first, you may not even realize that it's been lowered, and secondly, it seems to be just enough of a change that it's not going to make that terrible sound. Now, some of you are going to say that I'm not addressing the real issue here, which is that the lower part of the handlebar has way too much flex in it. And you're right about that, but unless you want to add some bracing to the plastic, there's no real easy way of fixing what was obviously meant to be a poorly designed cost-saving part. So now that we know what's making that terrible noise, I think we've come up with an easy way to fix it. However, before we get too far into that fix, I want to inspect the valve lash first. Now, if you didn't know, the valve lash is the clearance between the top of the valve and the rocker arm. And over some time, this clearance might change, and typically it gets larger, which if it does get too large, could cause some issues with how the engine starts and runs. Now, after using my screwdriver to help feel when the piston is at the top of its travel during the compression stroke, which happens right after the intake valve closes, I'll then use my feeler gauge to find out what the clearances are before I make any changes. Now, after picking the 7/1000 of an inch feeler, I'm going to slide it into the clearance, and ideally it should just barely fit, but as you can see, it's much too loose, which means the clearance is a lot wider than the feeler. Next, I'm going to go up a size, but instead of using the next size, I'll jump a few sizes and see if it fits any better, but as you can see, the clearance must be larger than this because the feeler is still loose. So what's going to eventually happen is that I'll find a feeler that will either fit just right or it'll be too big and won't fit. This is going to let me know what the clearance is, and unfortunately, it turns out it's a lot more than I want it to be. In fact, we finally made it to the 13/1000 of an inch feeler, which is quite a ways from where we want it to be. And since it's having a tough time fitting in the clearance, it must mean that the clearance is less than that, so it's probably about 12/1000 of an inch. Next, I'll loosen both jam bolts, that way I can make a few turns on the adjustment nuts. Now, turning the adjustment nuts clockwise will close up the clearance, which of course means turning them the other way will open them up. Next, we need to slide the feeler back into the clearance and then turn the nut until the feeler ever so slightly drags in the clearance. And when that does happen, you'll want to hold the adjusting nut while tightening the jam bolt. Afterwards, you'll want to check that the feeler still feels the same in the clearance because sometimes it might change after tightening the bolt down. And it would appear that's exactly what happened to this one, so I'll just loosen the bolt again, turn the nut a fraction of a turn, and then tighten the jam bolt again, followed by yet another check. Once this one is where we want it to be at, we'll then do the same process for the other rocker arm. Now, just like most things, once you've done it once or twice, muscle memory should take over and it'll get a lot easier to do, but the bigger question is, how often should you check the clearances? Now, the answer can either be found in your owner's manual or after doing an online search, but the best answer is every few years depending upon how much you use your mower. Now, another great answer was that the engine will tell you when it needs to be looked at because it may start to develop some strange issues, and at that point, if you've never checked it before, then it's probably a good time to do so. Now, more than likely, just like most engines from this period, I'm sure this must be the first time the valve cover has ever been removed to check the clearances. Before I go on, and while I have access to the flywheel, I'm going to install a compression tester into the spark plug opening. The tester will measure how much pressure the engine can make on the compression stroke and allow us to gauge how worn out the engine might be. So after spinning the engine over for about 4 seconds, the gauge is now showing about 145 psi, which is a really good reading, meaning this engine is quite healthy. Now, if your readings are less than this one, it just means it has some wear on it, but if your reading is close to 65 or 70 psi, then I consider that engine to be extremely worn out. Now that we know the engine is in good health and that the valve lash is in tolerance, I think it's time to put the mower back together. That way we can start the mower back up and find out if our guide adjustment really helped out with that terrible noise. Now, it's quite unfortunate, but I think these particular engines get a bad rap because so many of them have issues. But after seeing this one, it certainly proves that with a bit of work and more importantly maintenance, these should last for quite a long time. Now, this mower is over 13 years old already, but with the work we've done to it in these last few videos, it should last several more years, just so long as it don't hit something they shouldn't. So hopefully once we get it started back up, that noise will be gone, but if it's still there, I do have one more trick up my sleeve to fix it. So it looks as though the noise is finally gone, which is great news. Now if yours is still there, you might want to check that the bolts that hold the handlebar to the plastic are still tight. Otherwise, I would also check and make sure that all the fasteners on the mowing deck that hold the plastic are tight as well. So what was my other way to keep that noise from happening again if this fix didn't work? Well, it wouldn't have been very pretty, but I would have made some extra support brackets that attached to the plastic and bolted to the lower part of the handlebar. This would then keep the flex down to a minimum, and that would have gotten rid of the noise. However, I'm glad I didn't have to resort to it. I don't think I have to tell you how I feel about the use of cheap plastics on lawn equipment, but it is where we've gotten to in our society. But if you're okay with the mower being made out of 95% plastic, then go out and buy a new battery mower. Then you're going to see why I don't care for them, that and how expensive they are too. Now as for this one, I think it has just enough plastic on it to keep not only the cost down, but also its weight, which will make it a lot easier to use. Now, I've already got plans for this mower, so after some extensive testing, it will be going away to a new home. Hopefully they'll take care of it, but chances are that this will be the last time that oil that's in the engine is going to see the light of day. So how often do you need to change the oil then? Well, there are two ways of looking at it. You can either change it every year, which is probably too often, or you can never change it, which is obviously not advised. So make your own choice that's best for you. So my question is, did you think the way I fixed the noise from the recoil was okay, or should I have done it a different way? Maybe there was an issue with the recoil that needed to be fixed, or should I have focused on the handlebars flexing way more than they should have been? Thank you for watching. I really do appreciate your time here. Please feel free to ask me any questions about this project or about your own projects, and I hope to see you in the next video.